and the process is automatic. If I take them with me, it's automatic, declassified. Biden was vice president. He had absolutely no right to declassify as vice president. He doesn't come under the non-criminal Presidential Records Act. He comes under the very criminal Federal Records Act, unfortunately for him, but it's not going to matter because they don't follow the law, which has very severe penalties. He had classified documents that he took while he was a senator, which is absolutely inexcusable. And other senators, including Democrats, are outraged. But he's not being harassed and hounded like the people who work for me are. In fact, they seem to have forgotten about his documents entirely. So many, thousands and thousands. It's okay with him. They like to say that I'm obstructing, which I'm not, because I was working with NARA very nicely until the raid on my home. But Biden is obstructing by making it impossible to get the 1,850 boxes or explain why many documents were located in Chinatown. Can't explain it. Why were they in Chinatown? I don't know. Lastly, I'm under investigation. This time a civil investigation by another racist in reverse, who also campaigned on, I will get Trump. I will get him. This was her campaign. Never ran for office. I will get him. Her name is Letitia James. And she proclaimed while campaigning, quote, I look forward to going into the office of the Attorney General every single day, suing him, and then going home. Before she knew me. She announced, what is fueling my soul right now is Trump. And that she had her eyes on Trump Tower. Those eyes are focused on Trump Tower. Didn't know the young lady. She even assured her supporters in an election promise that we're going to definitely sue him. We're going to be a real pain in the ass. He's going to know my name personally. Yeah. And then she claimed that I was an illegitimate president. Think of it. With all we did on energy, with all we did on the military, on taxes, biggest tax cuts in history, biggest regulation cuts in history, right to try, people able to get drugs now that aren't approved. Hopefully you don't have that problem. Letitia James vowed to use every area of the law to, quote, investigate President Trump and his business transactions. Those transactions are going to be investigated, she said. And that of her family and his family, because we're going after his family and we're going after them hard. This is all before entering office and all before knowing anything at all about me, but she's going to get me. This is why, along with unrelenting crime, so many people and companies are leaving New York. She said that I falsified my financial statements, but in fact, we're proving and will prove that my financial statements were substantially more than we submitted, not less. And in all cases, have a strong disclaimer clause in them, which tells the institutions that may look at that if they want to, not to rely on the statement. But they've got a problem with their case because, number one, I'm very underleveraged. They can't believe it. All the stuff they read and gave, and have very little debt relative to the value of assets. And importantly, not one bank has lost even $1. She was investigating me to save banks. They have very good lawyers. But they didn't lose $1 with us during this period of time. In fact, the banks we're talking about made almost $200 million off Donald Trump, and they liked me very much. We never missed a payment, never got a default notice, had a great relationship with all of them. I don't need banks. I have a lot of cash. I built a great business with my family. I built a fantastic business. a son here who's done a great job, and I have another son here who's done a great job. And Ivanka, and Barron will be great someday. He's tall, he's smart, but I have a great family, and they've done a fantastic job, and we appreciate it very much. They've done good. So she's suing me over banks that weren't defrauded, when she should be focused on violent crime that's driving people out of the state. This is a persecution, not an investigation. She's put our family through hell. It's cost hundreds of millions of dollars to defend, but our heads are held very, very high. They want to settle the case, but I want no part of that. So here we are now. It's where we were today, in a city that was so great just 4 or 5 years ago. But now we're there, spend time there today, as you possibly read, with a local failed district attorney charging a former president of the United States for the first time in history, on a basis that every single pundit and legal analyst said, there is no case, there's no case. They kept saying, there's no case. Virtually everyone. But it's far worse than that, because he knew there was no case. That's why last week he delayed for a month and then immediately took that back and threw this ridiculous indictment together. Came out today, everybody said, this is not really an indictment, there's nothing here. My lawyers came to me and they said, there's nothing here, they're not even saying what you did. The criminal is the district attorney because he illegally leaked massive amounts of grand jury information, for which he should be prosecuted, or at a minimum, he should resign. And Alvin Bragg's wife confirmed a report that claimed her husband has Trump nailed on felonies. She has since locked down her Twitter account. His chief prosecutor, who represented the Democrats and crooked Hillary Clinton in a firm run by Chuck Schumer's brother, Robert, he quit the firm in order to go to work in the DA office in order to get Trump. Can you imagine that? Hillary Clinton's lawyer, Democrat firm. Ultimately, he quit as chief prosecutor because Bragg didn't think he had a case. Think of the same guy that brought this ridiculous thing today. Yet during his investigation, this prosecutor named Mark Pomerantz wrote and published a book saying all sorts of privileged things, has been very strongly reprimanded. He was reprimanded so strongly. I've never seen anything like it. That's probably the end of it. But what he did was probably very illegal, but he was very, very strongly reprimanded. Even District Attorney Bragg was furious with him. They were having a tremendous fight in the office because of it. But hope is never lost because various prosecutors in the DA's office also quit because they thought President Trump was being treated very unfairly. How about that? Isn't that great? Oh, I love them. I'd like to meet them. I'd like to meet them. The DA's office even had a webpage. Meet the team of executives who have done this to President Trump. That was the title. Isn't that nice? They immediately had to take it down. Meanwhile, overall crime in New York was up 30% last year, much more than that the year before, with felony assaults, robberies, and burglaries all up by massive, massive numbers. Not the same place that I know, not the same place that you know. And this is where we are right now. I have a Trump-hating judge with a Trump-hating wife and family whose daughter worked for Kamala Harris and now receives money from the Biden-Harris campaign and a lot of that. We recently had another trial, and the same judge told the fine man who worked for me for many, many years that if you admit your guilt, you will be in jail for 90 days. But if you don't, If we go through a trial and you're found guilty, you're going away for 10 years and maybe longer, which for a 75-year-old man with a great family really means life. What the prosecutors and judge did to that man, I will never forget, because it's right out of the old Soviet Union. That's where we are. They said, you say anything about Trump, meaning that's bad, and you won't even have to serve the 90 days. You'll walk free. And they say that to many of my employees. We have this Jack Smith lunatic threatening people every single day through his representatives. They're threatening jail terms. But talk about Trump and you'll go free. This is where we are as a nation. Who would have thought? They can't beat us at the ballot box, so they try and beat us through the law. That's the country in which we live, however, right now. The USA is a mess. Our economy is crashing. Inflation is out of control. Russia has joined with China. Can you believe that? Saudi Arabia has joined with Iran. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea have formed together as a menacing and destructive coalition. Would have never happened if I were your president. Would never have happened. Nor would Russia attacking Ukraine have happened. All of those lives would be saved. All of those beautiful cities would be standing. Our currency is crashing and will soon no longer be the world standard, which will be our greatest defeat, frankly, in 200 years. There will be no defeat like that. That will take us away from being even a great power. If you took the 5 worst presidents in the history of the United States and added them up, they would not have done near the destruction to our country as Joe Biden and the Biden administration have done. Incredibly, we are now a failing nation. We are a nation in decline. And now these radical left lunatics want to interfere with our elections by using law enforcement. We can't let that happen. With all of this being said, and with a very dark cloud over our beloved country, I have no doubt, nevertheless, that we will make America great again. God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you very much, Alan.
Okay, so you have been listening there to former President Donald Trump speaking to his crowd of supporters there in the Mar-a-Lago ballroom there in West Palm Beach. He started off his, about 20, 25-minute long statement there with a long preface of the litany of investigations that are ongoing into his conduct related to the Jack Smith special counsel probe the DOJ is conducting there into his actions leading up to and on January 6, 2021, the Capitol riot. Also, he spoke at length about the investigation going on, that sister investigation Jack Smith is conducting into the FBI raid there at Mar-a-Lago last August that found numerous classified documents that were not returned after former President Trump left the presidency. He's being at least alleged on obstruction charges there, possibly. And then, of course, he spoke at length about the Fulton County, Georgia investigation that District Attorney there, Fani Willis, is conducting as well into alleged interference there in the 2020 election in the state of Georgia. Remember that very famous phone call that was given to the Washington Post on January 3rd, 2020, outlining a call he made to then Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and others, saying to find 11,000 some votes in order to make up the difference there in a state that he had lost. Now, you were listening to the president. He then finally got into the issue at hand here, the now arraignment he underwent today in Lower Manhattan, going after District Attorney Alvin Bragg, calling this a political prosecution and persecution, saying that this, and these are his words, is only being done to interfere in the outcome of the 2024 presidential election. Now, there are some claims he also made about the 2020 presidential election contest, of course, that he lost to now President Biden. President Biden won, of course, by 306 electoral votes. The Trump campaign and his allies, remember, mounted 60-plus lawsuits in several different battleground states and lost most of them there. You just saw failed Arizona gubernatorial candidate Carrie Lake in the ballroom as well. It's interesting to see who all these Trump world figures are who came out for this speech. He also made some claims as well about the 2020 election contest that he lost. And remember, multiple federal agencies at the time said there was not a substantial amount of fraud to have overturned the election results as they stand. There, of course, you recognize that face, MyPillow CEO founder Mike Lindell, who himself has been quite a proponent of these baseless 2020 election conspiracy theories. You also saw Dan Scavino there, who used to run social media in the Trump White House. Now, remember, he's also talking about going after now President Biden for a number of different matters and issues that he says he would do differently if he were president right now, hammering him on his handling of the war in Ukraine, high gas prices, what have you. Now, he spoke at length about some of the investigations going on surrounding President Biden's son, Hunter Biden. We know there are several congressional investigations looking into Hunter Biden's dealings with China as a business partner, sitting on some boards there. Now, remember, President Biden is not under investigation for some of the alleged improprieties that former President Trump made today in this speech. Hunter Biden, of course, is under investigation at the level of the DOJ for certain infractions when it has to do with taxes, when it has to do with owning a weapon. We'll see how that plays out. But remember, Hunter Biden, President Biden, they have not been indicted. They have not been charged with a crime. Today, former President Donald Trump becoming the first former president in history to be indicted and arraigned on a crime. There you see his longtime ally and supporter, Roger Stone, there at Mar-a-Lago. So right now, we are going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll be bringing on more analysis, more experts, reporters as well, to go into the political aspect of this. Now that this has indeed happened today, how does that affect the 2024 presidential primary contest? How will this affect former President Trump's campaign schedule? Remember, he does not have to appear in court again until December the 4th. So we wanted to air all of that in its entirety here on Live Now from Fox. This has been the story of the day, and we have been on it from the very beginning. Both just yesterday, when he made his way from Palm Beach to New York, spent the night there at Trump Tower, and then made the way from Trump Tower to Lower Manhattan today to face that arraignment on this indictment, 34 felony counts. I'm Andrew Kraft. As we approach the top of the hour, we're going to take just a quick commercial break here. More where that came from in just a moment. And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox, almost 6 o'clock here on the West Coast, 9 o'clock there in West Palm Beach, Florida. You just watched former President Trump deliver remarks, the first on camera, responding to that historic arraignment today. Fox News correspondent David Spunt has a look and a summary at what all has transpired today from Washington.
The 16-page, 34-count indictment centers on what Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg calls a catch-and-kill scheme to boost then-candidate Donald Trump's campaign for the White House. Bragg's office alleges the defendant, Donald J. Trump, repeatedly and fraudulently falsified New York's business records to conceal criminal conduct that hid damaging information from the voting public during the 2016 presidential election. The 34 counts focus on what Bragg calls reimbursements to former Trump fixer Michael Cohen, who claims he paid $150,000 to former Playboy playmate Karen McDougal and $130,000 to adult film actress Stormy Daniels in an effort to silence them and keep the story out of the headlines to help the Trump campaign. Bragg continues, in order to execute the unlawful scheme, the participants violated election laws and made and caused false entries in the business records of various entities in New York. The participants also took steps that mischaracterized, for tax purposes, the true nature of the payments made in furtherance of the scheme. In New York state law, falsifying records in the first degree is a felony and includes intent to commit another crime. But the other crime not specifically mentioned in the indictment.
The indictment doesn't specify that because the law does not so require.
But Bragg points to a New York state election law,
Which makes it a crime to conspire to promote a candidacy by unlawful means.
In Washington, David Spunt, Fox News.
David, thanks so much. We want to bring into the conversation now Ben Jacobs, a reporter who has been following this all day. We spoke last night, of course, Ben, and now we were all, anticipating this, previewing this today. It has come to pass now. You're hearing the word surreal a lot. Do you agree?
In some ways, it certainly is surreal in the abstract to think about a former president being indicted. But in other ways, this was so expected that this has been priced in. There's been speculation about Trump's criminal jeopardy for a while now, that this seemed almost inevitable. And certainly in his response tonight, it seemed like a normal Trump rally rather than the chasing response of criminal defendant facing indictment.
Yeah, let's talk about the remarks. So many people have just watched this. We just got off it. But I was struck by the fact that he kind of laid out the preface into all of the investigations into him at the moment, and then finally commented on what happened today. So that was quite the setup there, was it not?
Oh, it was quite the setup for him going through and dealing with what are, frankly, far more likely legally damaging investigations that he's dealing with. That as of now, he's dealing with the Georgia prosecution over his attempts to overturn the 2020 election. He's dealing with the federal special prosecutor, Jack Smith, which combines both elections and his mishandling of classified documents, as well as the fact in several weeks he has a defamation trial in New York that he has to go back to over a woman who's suing him, saying that he defamed her when he denied that he had raped her in a New York department store in the 1990s. So there's a host of things going on. And part of this was to lay out the predicates there and build it back to this, because this is something that most legal experts agree is probably the most legally tenuous of the cases that he faces. And to tie it all together and try to link all of these together is part of a broad-reaching effort to try to stop him and try to keep him from running for president in 2024.
Okay, to that point, though, Ben, you heard that. That was, I think, the line that stuck out to me in this speech today. He flat out said on camera that this is political persecution. This is meant to interfere in his run, in his bid, his candidacy for the 2024 election. That seems to be, I guess, the line that all of his supporters and himself, they're going to go with this.
Yes, it's him versus the world, and that is the line that they've been using, and using this in a variety of ways. And some have been using some pretty raw historical analogies to describe this. But this is the type of thing where this is his message that they're coming for you. I'm just between them and you, and that there is some sort of heat shield to protect his voters and his base from these elites. Talking about Alvin Bragg as a Soros-backed prosecutor and deliberately emphasizing his campaign funds from George Soros. That this is really sort of a broader, overarching message of us against them that he's basing his entire presidential campaign around.
Yeah, Ben, did we hear from, some of his rivals in the, nominating process that have announced, that have not announced today? We got a lot of congressional reaction, but we haven't heard much from them today.
No, there's been relatively minimal reaction from other presidential candidates. From their perspective, they weighed in on the indictment and supported him before, but this has been a day in which Trump has really dominated the news. That, for example, Ron DeSantis didn't have much of a public schedule today, but this is trying to step back and try not get in the way of this, because there's not a ton of upside into getting to the middle of this news cycle that they tried to jump in before. But at this point, all the coverage is so entirely focused on Trump himself that there's relatively little room for political punditry or stuff. This is a day for the legal pundits as much as political pundits.
Yeah, I am kind of curious as well. We were asking some of our legal analysis whether or not his day-to-day, his campaign schedule will be impacted by this. He doesn't have to show up again until December 4th. That could change in the interim. But do you anticipate this being deleterious to his campaign schedule or beneficial?
It's certainly not helpful to have to block out chunks of time to deal with lawyers,
right?
And all the legal stuff that. But he had to deal with lawyers at this point for a while. But it's not as if the legal troubles suddenly popped out on him. This is not something yesterday everything was free and easy. That he's been in legal jeopardy since leaving the White House. And that this doesn't add anything new to him. It changes the nature of what it is, but the fact that he's facing a host of criminal cases, this doesn't necessarily change the day to day. It just frames it in a different way for terms of what it means politically for him and what it means legally for him, as he is now officially a criminal defendant.
Yeah, Ben, let's talk about his campaign. Massive fundraising numbers since we got the news that he was indicted last Thursday. And then, of course, also, like I said, there'll be fundraising off this as well. But he has gotten quite a big poll bump in the, polls when he's up against some of his would-be GOP rivals for the nomination. He's far and away ahead, right?
Yes, no, he's far away ahead in polls of Republican primary that has helped him with the Republican primaries. But you've seen polls of independent voters who approve of the indictment. And the challenge for him is that while this helps him beat Ron DeSantis, as I mentioned before, that there's nothing that's happened today, nothing he said in that speech earlier tonight that helps him with independent voters, with suburban women in Phoenix, in Atlanta, in Milwaukee, that this is something that binds the base closer to him and works to energize voters who voted for him before. But there's nothing about this that makes him more appealing to someone who voted for Joe Biden in 2020. And that's sort of the contradiction of this. This emphasizes the reasons why people who voted for him want to vote for him again, but this doesn't do a lot to win people over. And he lost by 7 million votes last time, and that's sort of the dilemma here. That this helps him in the primary, helps him get to Milwaukee in the summer of 2024, but this doesn't really help him with Wisconsin in November 2024.
Yeah, well, speaking of Milwaukee this year, there's going to be a debate in August amongst whoever the GOP, candidate class is at that point. And I would be hard pressed. Do you think any of these other candidates, Pompeo possibly, Pence possibly, yes, Nikki Haley has announced, Asa Hutchinson has announced, DeSantis hasn't announced yet, but are they going to go after Trump on a debate stage over the fact that he is a criminal defendant, he's indicted? Do you think that's going to happen?
I think someone has to do it. I mean, at this point, it's hard to beat someone in an election by praising them. As the great philosopher Ric Flair said, to be the man, you have to beat the man. But this is not something that was not a topic of conversation in 2016. That these personal attacks, the investigations of Trump, were brought up by Trump's rivals. But at this point, you have to somehow deal with it and take on the risk of doing it. That someone has to be the person who does it. But that also leads to the other sort of challenge that it's he who wields the knife rarely wears the crown. That there's there's political that to take down Trump, you have to go after on this because this is a real political Achilles heel in a general election. But it doesn't make you terribly popular with Republican primary voters to do it, and that's the dilemma that any other Republican is facing.
Yeah, Ben, we're just watching the plane land back in Palm Beach a couple of hours ago. We all watched these remarks. I guess, you know, Ben Slasser, you follow this so closely. I guess what's next on the campaign schedule? We have a lot of would-be candidates. They're traveling to a lot of the early states. Possible one, Republican Senator from South Carolina, Tim Scott, just announced quite a heavy schedule there to early states. Nikki Haley was at the southern border yesterday. Ron DeSantis is going to so many of these early states. What's Trump up to? What is the campaign's next move here?
Trump's next big trip is he's speaking to the NRA convention in Indianapolis next week, which will be another place for him to appear behind a conservative crowd to talk about his record on gun rights, on the Second Amendment, and that will be sort of the next step. There is they're continuing to take advantage of his boost in fundraising, and the boost in fundraising also, you know, has its own additive effect that, you know, a Trump rally is expensive to put on. The more money they raise, the more Trump rallies they can do. And you'll see more visits to early states and more attempts to try to take advantage of the outsized media attention he's got over the past few days.
All right. Ben Jacobs, we appreciate you joining us for really this historic moment. We'll definitely be speaking again. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. Hope you enjoyed that conversation, found it informative, as so many have joined us today to help us break down what we have all witnessed on this very historic day from New York City there to West Palm Beach. I'm Andrew Kraft. We're going to take just a quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll be replaying for you the press conference that Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg gave today after Trump's arraignment. More on that in 2 minutes.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here today. Earlier this afternoon, Donald Trump was arraigned on a New York Supreme Court indictment returned by a Manhattan grand jury on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. Under New York state law, it is a felony to falsify business records with intent to defraud and an intent to conceal another crime. That is exactly what this case is about. 34 false statements made to cover up other crimes. These are felony crimes in New York State, no matter who you are. We cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct. The defendant repeatedly made false statements on New York business records. He also caused others to make false statements. The defendant claimed that he was paying Michael Cohen for legal services performed in 2017. This simply was not true. And it was a false statement that the defendant made month after month in 2017. April, May, June, and so on through the rest of the year. For 9 straight months, the defendant held documents in his hand containing this key lie, that he was paying Michael Cohen for legal services performed in 2017. And he personally signed checks for payments to Michael Cohen for each of these 9 months. In total, the grand jury found there were 34 documents with this critical false statement. Why did Donald Trump repeatedly make these false statements? The evidence will show that he did so to cover up crimes relating to the 2016 election. Donald Trump, executives at the publishing company American Media Incorporated, Mr. Cohen, and others agreed in 2015 to a catch and kill scheme. That is, a scheme to buy and suppress negative information to help Mr. Trump's chance of winning the election. As part of this scheme, Donald Trump and others made 3 payments to people who claimed to have negative information about Mr. Trump. To make these payments, they set up shell companies, and they made yet more false statements, including, for example, in AMI, American Media Incorporated's business records. One of the 3 people that they paid to keep quiet was a woman named Stormy Daniels. Less than 2 weeks before the presidential election, Michael Cohen wired $130,000 to Stormy Daniels' lawyer. That payment was to hide damaging information from the voting public. The participant scheme was illegal. The scheme violated New York election law, which makes it a crime to conspire to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. The $130,000 wire payment exceeded the federal campaign contribution cap, and the false statements in AMI's books violated New York law. That is why Mr. Trump made false statements about his payments to Mr. Cohen. He could not simply say that the payments were a reimbursement for Mr. Cohen's payments to Stormy Daniels. To do so, to make that true statement, would have been to admit a crime. So instead, Mr. Trump said that he was paying Mr. Cohen for fictitious legal services in 2017 to cover up actual crime committed the prior year. And in order to get Michael Cohen his money back, they planned one last false statement. In order to complete the scheme, they planned to mischaracterize the repayments to Mr. Cohen as income to the New York State tax authorities. The conduct I just described and that which was charged by the grand jury is felony criminal conduct in New York State. True and accurate business records are important everywhere, to be sure. They are all the more important in Manhattan, the financial center of the world. That is why we have a history in the Manhattan DA's office of vigorously enforcing white-collar crime. My office, including the talented prosecutors you saw at arraignment earlier today, has charged hundreds of felony falsifying business records. This charge, it can be said, is the bread and butter of our white-collar work. And fraud presents itself in all different forms here in Manhattan. We have charged falsifying business records for those who violated federal bank secrecy laws. We have charged falsifying business records for those who were seeking to cover up sex crimes. And we have brought this charge for those who committed tax violations. At its core, This case today is one with allegations like so many of our white collar cases. Allegations that someone lied again and again to protect their interests and evade the laws to which we are all held accountable. As this office has done time and time again, we today uphold our solemn responsibility to ensure that everyone stands equal before the law. No amount of money and no amount of power changes that enduring American principle. I'll now take questions.
Right. So we're going to take a limited number of questions. There are no follow-up questions. One question per reporter. I will call on you. And again, we have limited time. Thank you. The first question will be Rick.
Bragg, thank you. Ricky Russell, why now? Some argue that this is a political move. You're not going to be a political person. If Rick is going to go into
We conducted a thorough and rigorous investigation, as we're known to do, at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. I've been doing this for 24 years and am no stranger to rigorous, complex investigations. I bring cases when they're ready. Having now conducted a rigorous, thorough investigation, the case was ready to be brought, and it was brought.
Mr. Bragg, the indictment says that there were 34 false business records. And it would then conceal another crime, but the indictment does not specifically say what those crimes were. We are assuming perhaps that they might be election related. I'm wondering if you can specify what laws were also broken.
Right. So let me say as an initial matter, the indictment doesn't specify that because the law does not so require. In my remarks, I mentioned a couple of laws, which I will highlight again now. The first is New York State election law, which makes it a crime to conspire to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. I further indicated a number of unlawful means, including more additional false statements, including statements that were planned to be made to tax authorities. I also noted the federal election law cap on contribution limits.
But why weren't there those crimes charged? Why wasn't he charged with those crimes?
Well, I'm not going to go into our deliberative process on what was brought. The charges that were brought were the ones that were brought. The evidence in the law is the basis for those decisions.
You had expressed a year ago that you had some reservations about the case's readiness. Can you talk to us about what were some of the questions in your mind that needed to be answered in order to bring a case of this magnitude?
I'm not going to go chapter and verse into any thinking. What I will say is, I believe the time period you're talking about, I've been in office for a couple of months. The investigation, in my view, was not concluded into the conduct in particular that is the basis for the charges today. Since that time, we've had more evidence made available to the office and opportunity to meet with additional witnesses. So as I said earlier, I've been doing this for 24 years. I don't bring cases prior to a thorough and rigorous investigation. Now, having done so, the case has been brought.
Mr. Bragg, Garrett Hake with NBC News. Your predecessor took a hard look at this case and decided not to charge it. Federal prosecutors took a hard look at this case and decided not to charge it. Do you believe you have new evidence that led you to decide to charge this, or why now?
Well, as I just mentioned, we have had available to the office additional evidence that was not in the office's possession prior to my time here. And as to your part of your question about the federal, we have a distinct and strong, I would say profound, independent interest in New York State. This is the business capital of the world. We regularly do cases involving false business statements. The bedrock, in fact, the basis for business integrity and a well-functioning business marketplace is true and accurate record keeping. That's the charge that's brought here, falsifying New York State business records.
Just to read back one line from your statement facts, the participants also took steps that mischaracterized for tax purposes the true nature of payments and furtherance of the scheme. Do you allege former President Trump was one of the participants who mischaracterized the payments for tax purposes?
I'm not going to go beyond the plain language statement of facts, which I think speaks for itself.
the
So the charge is falsifying business records. The charge requires, as I specified, criminal conduct that was concealed. One of the concealed crimes we allege is New York State election law. I sort of went through in our statement of facts, which I think many of you have in front of you, goes through things including, text messages, emails, contemporaneous phone records, multiple witnesses. All of that will be, as you saw in the fall, borne out in a public courtroom in downtown Manhattan.
Our last question is Jonah.
Yeah, Bragg, the charges that were related to the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels, the release from your office, also mentions another woman, Karen McDougal, as well as a doorman. Can you comment on how those players are related to the charges you've brought or to the case overall?
I'm glad you put your finger on that, because it's not just about one payment. It is 34 business records, 34 false statements in business records, and we're concealing criminal conduct. And the earlier question about New York State election law, when I talked about conspiracy to promote a candidacy by unlawful means, those unlawful means we allege include the conduct set forth in the statement of facts, which is additional false statements separate and apart from the charged ones in AMI documents, planned false statements to taxing authorities. It is not just that one $130,000 wire payment. Thanks so much.
Bragg, any comment about any incitement of violence by former president?
At what point do you think that that word?
Okay, there you have it. We wanted to show you those remarks. If you hadn't seen them yet, we've been replaying them throughout the day. Alvin Bragg taking some questions about the nature of this case, the indictment that he brought against the former president. All right, let's take a quick commercial break. We're approaching the bottom of the hour here. There are a lot more stories today, believe it or not, that don't have to do with former President Trump. We want to get to some of them when we come back. And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. We're approaching the bottom of the hour, 6:30 here on the West Coast, 8:30 there in the Windy City in Chicago. Take a look at this viewpoint here, right there, the Chicago River. That's a very cool shot. Well, voters went to the polls today. The runoff election for mayor happening. Polls are now closed. I want to put up some other vantage points that we have in and around the city here. You can see All right, so those are the two candidates as we speak. Paul Vallis and Brandon Johnson, those candidates for mayor, they're in a tight race right now. Voters chose between sharply contrasting views on issues including crime, taxes, schools, and investment in policing to lead the heavily Democratic city. It's the country's third largest city. So we want to put up the watch parties that are ongoing at this point in time. Take a look at this. All right, so in the upper right hand of your screen there, that is Brandon Johnson's watch party. And then right below that is Paul Vallis's. The race pitting Paul Vallis. He's the former CEO of Chicago Schools. He's a moderate Democrat. He was endorsed by Chicago's police union and major business groups against Brandon Johnson. He's a former teacher and union organizer. He's backed by the powerful Chicago Teachers Union. And so right now, with much of the race and the votes counted, it is very neck to neck. I want to put up this tweet here from Chicago Tribune reporter who follows this very closely, Gregory Pratt. This was about 15 minutes ago. He said, Chicago mayor's race very close, but Brandon Johnson's lead continues growing slightly, 250,231 to 246,415. So about 90% of the vote reporting right now. So that is quite significant. A lot of people following this race did not maybe think it would be as close as it is right now. Now, remember, Vallis and Johnson advanced to the runoff after finishing ahead of current incumbent mayor Lori Lightfoot. That was back February the 28th, making her the first incumbent in 40 years to seek re-election in the city and lose. So the contest has centered on the increase in violent crime during the COVID-19 pandemic and soaring property taxes. That's according to the Associated Press. So with polls now closed, today's results also could have implications for Democrats nationally ahead of other elections, including other mayoral elections and races in other cities like Philadelphia and Houston. We've been covering those here as well. So for both progressives and the party's more moderate wing, the Chicago race is seen as a test of organizing power and messaging, especially with issues salient to big cities like crime and alignment with law enforcement unions there. So these are live pictures that you are seeing in and out of Chicago here at these two watch parties between these two candidates, and the race right now, according to all indications, is very, very close. It's neck and neck. So once some of these candidates come out, step up to the podium there, we're going to hear from some of their supporters, and we'll see if we get a race call tonight. Remember, we do here at Live Now from Fox go by the Associated Press and the Fox News decision desk when making such race calls there in these hot button elections. And so right now, let's talk more about the candidates. Paul Vallis has repeatedly attacked Brandon Johnson for past comments Johnson has made in support of defunding police, which Johnson says he would not do as mayor. Still, Vallis, who wants to hire hundreds more police officers, says the biggest quality dividing the candidates is experience. The former Chicago budget director, who took over troubled schools in Chicago and elsewhere, says his background will be critical for a city emerging from the pandemic with policing and economic crises. Johnson, though, in turn, has argued that Vallis, who has run for office multiple times as a Democrat, is too right-wing to lead Chicago. He noted some of his major donors have also supported Republicans, including Donald Trump, and that the controversial head of the police union has defended January 6th insurrectionists. So many on Johnson's side there, the progressive left flank of the Democratic Party, have accused Paul Vallis of being Republican, even though he has come out and said he is a Democrat, albeit his critics call him a moderate one at that. And so right now, just wanted to give you kind of a lowdown there on these two candidates and who will lead Chicago for the next 4 years. Democratic incumbent Lori Lightfoot, who was the first female and gay mayor of Chicago, losing in that first round back in late February. She was deeply unpopular. The polls had her running third or fourth. And now these two candidates trying to fill the void. They each have quite juxtaposing, differing views and outlines for what they want to see the future of Chicago. All right, back out live there to the Chicago River, gorgeous vantage point there, right in the loop. We are going to take just a quick commercial break. When we come back, we have a lot more top headlines. Just wanted to give you kind of a primer there of this major race happening in the nation's third largest city, this runoff election between Paul Vallis and Brandon Johnson. More stories where that came from in just a moment. And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. In addition to the Chicago mayoral runoff election, we want to go out to some of these international headlines today as well from Fox News correspondent Mike Tobin with a look at the newest member of the NATO alliance.
History being made in Europe on Tuesday. Finland officially becoming the 31st member of NATO, giving the alliance more than 800 new miles of shared border with Russia as the war in Ukraine grinds on. Finland is a traditionally neutral country, but it was convinced to apply for NATO membership after the invasion last year.
War has returned to Europe, and Finland has decided to join NATO and be part of the world's most successful alliance.
The era of military non-alignment in our history has come to an end.
Moscow says it will retaliate, threatening to deploy more troops near the Finnish border that could help the Ukrainians by diverting Russian resources and manpower from the front lines as the Ukrainian military plans a counteroffensive. Russia also stepping up its deployment of nukes to its close ally Belarus, claiming the move is a defensive reaction to NATO's expansion.
We're not threatening nuclear war. All this narrative that Russia is threatening the world with the nukes is a part of a propaganda.
Meanwhile, here in Kyiv, a group of American business and political leaders is looking ahead to the post-war rebuilding effort. It's being led by former Secretary of State